My name is Shirlene Perkins, and I'm the president, CEO of the United for Scleroderma Foundation. Thank you all for coming to our first annual Scleroderma Awareness Fundraising event. It means a great deal to me for you to take the time out of your busy day to learn more about scleroderma. We have planned a program to help spread awareness about this rare autoimmune disease. Please enjoy. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. I wish you was the preacher of my church. Out of there. I'm sorry. We're going to bring up now Dr. Harold Jones up to the. He's also the vice president of the United for Scleroderma Foundation.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? I don't have a prepared speech or anything like that. I'll just talk from the top of my head, from my knowledge. So, what is scleroderma? Scleroderma is an autoimmune disease. It's part of the arthritis family. It presents with children as well as women. Have a strong propensity for children and women, often women. It presents with hardening of the skin, joint pain, heartburn for the internal part of it can affect the organs internally. I've even heard one person here who mentioned the having transplants, which is severe. But oftentimes it presents with heartburn as well, or acid reflux. Now, anyone can have acid reflux. It doesn't always say you got scleroderma. So it makes it difficult to diagnose because of the overlapping with other other issues. But one of the things is a tightening of the skin, which is almost pathognomonic, meaning that you can't miss it. The skin is tight. They have difficulties, chronic joint pain, and like I said, the heartburn. Oftentimes again, acid reflux is part of that, but it's not diagnostic of that. It also affects the hands, the feet, the fingers, and obviously the face with the hardening. And it presents with something called Raynaud phenomenon, which is a sort of vascular disease where there's cold intolerance. So those patients with scleroderma needs to wear mittens, anything to keep their extremity warm, especially their fingertips. In the wintertime, it's very problematic for these patients. Cold environments is a problem for those patients. Treatment includes medication. There's no treatment for it. They're just trying to manage it. And as well as physical therapy to help loosen up the joints. Some even mention surgery, but as a surgeon, it makes it difficult to operate on a patient. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't want to operate on those patients because you can't close, it's hard to close. So surgery is something that they mention, but it's pretty much, I don't know how many surgeons want to do that. Also too, they talk about triggers. Some talk about a viral infection may trigger that, or some even medication as well, some medications. So these are the things that it put the scleroderma patient in a mixed bag because you don't know what it is. It takes months. And I think for Charlene here, it took about, 7-8 months? I mean, she would call me and we would discuss, like, she's going to multiple physicians and no one can come up, we think it's this, but then the test is negative. We think it's that, but then the test is negative. A whole host of tests because there's so much overlap with other things. But one of the main things is that once the skin started to tighten, the connective tissue for that help the hands to heal, it gets so hard, it makes it very difficult. So that makes it a little easier to diagnose. But again, there is no treatment. You're doing strictly management right now. And the internal part, it can affect all the organs, any organ system, digestive, kidneys, a whole host of things. But superficially, what we see is the facial tightness, and again, the joint limitation or restriction of joint motion and swelling. So based on that, I'll turn it back over. Thank you.
Dr. Jones. All right, put your hands together again for Dr. Jones. Thank you. Now, at this point, we have behind us a panel. We'll have you next. You ready? Oh, you're part of the panel. Okay. Right now, we have a panel behind us that we're going to discuss scleroderma. But real quick, I would like to hand over the mic to Miss Carla Sweden, right? And then Demi Montgomery. Yeah, we're going to ask questions. Yeah, but I want them to just hear their story. Yeah, introduce themselves, and then you all can ask a bunch of questions. Because when you hear their story, it's compelling, it's drama, and it's triumph. And what? Yes. Okay, so we're not going to do that now? Okay, so we're not going to hear stories. We're just going to get some questions. So we have questions from, you have questions for the panel. Okay, here we go.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rochelle Hallisey. I am president of the foundation. And so for today's panel, I have prepared several questions. So we're going to hear all about those things that Errol talked about just now. First thing, though, in terms of getting a bio, so we want to hear from each of the panelists, their name, where they're from, what they do now or did before they had the diagnosis.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, my name is Carla Sweden. I'm a scleroderma patient. I was born in Beirut, Lebanon. We moved to California in 1984, and I recently moved to Ohio in July 2021. 22. And I was an information systems analyst before I fell ill, and right now I'm legally disabled. Anything else you want to know? All right.
Hi, everybody. I'm Debbie Montgomery. I'm from Dayton, Ohio. I've had scleroderma for 22 years. I was 19 when I was diagnosed, and before I got diagnosed, I was a community engagement specialist for our homeless shelters in Dayton, Ohio. And now I am the CEO of the Waiting Room Entertainment, which is an organization that goes around the countries and hosts social clubs for people with all disabilities. And it's all free of charge to them.
Why, hello, I'm Shirlene Perkins. And so Demi and Carla, my name is Shirlene Perkins, and I was a substitute teacher with Cleveland Metropolitan School District prior to being diagnosed. I am legally disabled as well. As of January of 2020, when I received the diagnosis, I applied and was granted within 1 year. And I currently work part-time with Carnival Child Development Center about 2 to 3 days a week. And I thank some of my coworkers for being here. Hey, guys.
Okay, so sorry. I had my plan for how this was going to go. So I think the first question that I have is really just going to tell us a little bit about the first symptoms you experienced. So just kind of tell us a little bit about, because I think one of the big things, like Harold mentioned about the disease, is that it's so difficult to diagnose, and I think it would interest people to hear like some of those first symptoms that you experienced. So you guys could just pass the mic and just share with us some of those first symptoms that led you down this journey.
In hindsight, okay, looking back now, can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Looking back now, the first symptoms were in my eyes. I had swelling in the eyes and then eventually in the hands. But I went to an ophthalmologist and they just said I was looking at the computer too long. So we just kind of overlooked it, and that was the first symptom I had. But I've now lost 40% of my optic nerve. There's nothing you could do to fix that. So I really only have 20% of my vision remaining. Sometimes I wish if the doctors would have been more persistent in looking at my optic nerve, that maybe we could have caught it earlier.
Thank you.
The first symptoms I had so I had a traumatic event happen where I lost twins. And so that's the triggers that he was talking about earlier. So I had just a small circle on my arm, dark circle, hands were hurting, hand was starting to lock. And I went to the rheumatologist, and they did a biopsy. They misdiagnosed and said I had morphea, which is a lesser version of scleroderma. And then I had to go to a specialist, a rheumatologist, and they were able to diagnose.
I was vacationing in Savannah, and I noticed my fingers start to darken as well as my skin on my forearm, and my fingers started to tighten, and it continued up to my elbow, and that was my first symptoms.
So next, just to kind of continue with your journey, just talk through a little bit about how long, I think somebody said 6 months it was, Harold had mentioned, but how long did it actually take? I know you guys started for us where this all started, but just take us through how long it took to
So
actually get the
for
final.
me, I saw the first symptoms in June, and I was given a diagnosis in January. So for myself, it was a very short period of time. However, when you make appointments to see specialty doctors, you have to sometimes wait months before you can even get an appointment. And so therefore, all of the smaller steps were taken where I saw a medical doctor who thought maybe I just had carpal tunnel, and then I took 3 months to get a carpal tunnel appointment and only be told, no, you don't have carpal tunnel. And so then you're passed on, and it goes back and forth till the pain is so severe in your arms and fingers that you can not stand anyone to touch you because everything is tight. You can't comb your hair, you can't barely brush your teeth, can't button your clothes, zip a zipper. So your fingers, my fingers were the first to be affected with the disease, as well as I started receiving some signs of acid reflux.
For me, it took about, I want to say 2 years, because when I first noticed the problem, I went to the dermatologist, and I didn't follow up, I guess because I was young, and I didn't think it was that serious, and so I didn't follow up after being diagnosed with the morphea, so I had a big gap there before I was actually given the actual disease.
What I mentioned earlier about the first signs being swelling in the eyes, I let it go for probably a couple of years after that. I thought I was just tired because I was working too much. I wasn't exercising. But then in February of 2018, it hit me like a train. I couldn't get out of bed for 2 weeks. I couldn't even get myself to sleep. Every inch of my body was aching. And then eventually I started going to doctors, but I didn't get a diagnosis till July 31st, 2018, and it was Dr. Kavari in Los Angeles. And the only way she said she recognized the disease the minute I walked in, but the reason she was able to recognize it that easily is because she was trained under Dr. Clemens from UCLA, and he's one of the founders on the research of scleroderma in California. And when I called to get an appointment with him, they said, "Oh, you're gonna have to wait 4 months for an appointment." By then, I could barely walk. I was at 5.0 blood. An average female has 12.0 blood. And I said, "You don't understand. I'm dying." I begged, borrowed, and steal to be able to get an appointment with him within 2 weeks. We had family members that I knew that worked at UCLA, and they got me an appointment with him. And when I saw him, he said, "I came in just for you, kiddo. I love Dr. Clemens. He's like a grandfather to me now." And that's where the rest of the journey began, was when I finally had an appointment with Dr. Clemens.
Much. So I do have a list of different questions, but I wanted to give the audience an opportunity. I just wanted to take a minute and see if there's anybody who has a question they want to ask before we move on to the rest of our questions. Did anybody have?
So I have a question. I presented that cold weather, cold climates makes it difficult for those that are affected with the Raynaud part of the phenomenon, where cold intolerance or exposure to coldness. How did that affect you, coming from California to Ohio, where it's colder here?
Right. It still affected me. When I was working in the office before I had a diagnosis, my hands were always cold. I would always complain about the AC. People would just kind of like make fun of me because I'm always cold. I'm wearing like a hoodie in the office, and they thought I was just weird. But yeah, and even today, it's like 90 degrees outside. I'm sweating, but my hands and feet are hurting and they're blue. And sometimes I can like barely walk because my feet are so numb from the cold.
So my real true question is, last point, was the decision to move from a warm climate in California to Ohio, considering it would be exacerbated by that condition, by this weather?
For me, losing I had a team of 17 doctors between City of Hope and UCLA, and the warmer climate. It was a tough decision to make. This political and financial climate we're living in is pushing a lot of people out of their comfort zones where they live and where they need to be. But yes, it's a tough decision for me, and I found a scleroderma specialist, not just a rheumatologist. The only scleroderma specialist I found in Ohio is all the way in Toledo. I have yet to see him. I have an appointment. But yes, that was a very difficult decision for me to make, and I'm scared because I'm not with a team of doctors that I trust. They know me. They know everything inside and out. They know all my allergies, and I'm gonna have to build that again here. That's not gonna be an easy task.
Anybody else? Okay, so another question that I have for you guys is in terms of the support that you receive from your family. Just curious, once your family learned about your disease, would you guys give us a little insight into, are you feeling well supported by your family? Do you seek support somewhere else? Just kind of share with us, because I know this is difficult and you need support. So yeah, did you get that from your family or you get that from elsewhere?
For me, no, they don't support me very well. I have my husband and my daughter, and the rest of the family kind of moves around like I'm not sick. Um, they're so busy with their actual lives that they don't really notice, or they don't want to notice. And so I kind of travel. It's isolating. It's very isolating. I get more support from my friends in the community than I do my actual family.
Yes, I received a tremendous amount of support from the very beginning because it hit so sudden, and none of us were expecting a diagnosis of a disease that does not have a cure. So it's very difficult. Um, we have other family members that also have autoimmune diseases, but people don't recognize that we are very severe, and sometimes we don't look like we're sick, and they don't think that we're sick, but we are. But we really push ourselves to get up out of bed and move and go that extra mile. Demi is one of the first persons that I met. Um, she lives in Dayton, Ohio. She's been diagnosed for quite a long time. And she's the reason why we're here today, because she pushes me to continue to move forward. And when I see her and I know if she can do it, I can do it. I met Carla at the last event we had back at Rare Disease Day in Columbus. So I really appreciate them being here today because they traveled to get here. And so Carla has had extensive problems as well. And because there's no cure and there's no direct path, we all have a different path as to how we're affected. And it makes it very difficult for a diagnosis. We also have another panelist who has not been able to arrive, but we do hope that you get to meet her before we're done. That's traveling from Columbus. And so she has some support, but not a great deal. I can speak for her. But Demi has been an advocate with Scleroderma for the last 17 or 18 years. And so she pushes us to keep going. So she has been a great support.
It's nice to know you guys have each other for support. And sure, like she mentioned, the family definitely supports you. A couple more questions before we move on, because, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Carla.
I didn't think it was for everybody, but it's okay. You know, I do have a terrible disease. It disfigures you, disables you, and in some cases, it eventually kills you. But I am the most blessed person on the face of the earth. God gave me the most incredible family anybody could ask for. Best friends that never left my side. I've been very blessed. My sisters never left me alone for a moment. My sister Rita, that's the oldest sister I have, and when I was in the hospital, the doctors told my family to just let me go. I was suffering too much. And my twin sister was talking to my sister. She said, I don't know what to pray for anymore. Do I pray for her to live? Do I pray for her to be relieved of her suffering? And my sister Rita said, in her accent, we are for and we are going to stay for. And I remember I was in the hospital for 6 months, and that year we had like a terrible weather system. It was just constant rain in California. I remember looking out the window and wanting to be outside so bad. And my mom said, Carla, it's raining prayers on you. We had family from Canada, Spain, Dubai, Beirut, Ohio, family throughout the United States praying for me. I am so blessed. I'm just too lucky. Thank you.
And, oh. Here, so Emily, because it's people around the corner, I want to make sure they can hear you.
What is it that family and friends can do to like help them the most? Or is there something?
The thing about it is, a lot of times you can't see it. So unless you get it like a dose of reality and see somebody like me, where I've lost 6 fingers, a toe, a kneecap, 2 elbows, unless you see that, you don't really realize how damaging it could be. So what you guys are seeing on the outside of me is on the inside of these 2. So you can't see it the way you can see mine, but it's still the same thing. So that's their heart, lungs, kidneys, all that. So the most things you can do is just be there. There's never going to be a time where they don't need somebody. So there's appointments. I mean, it's a massive amount of appointments. Just things that are pick me ups and lift me ups and do things with them, and just the fight, because you're in for a fight, because this, you know, like you look at things different because your life is changed. So like for me, like I'm always looking at, this is my beginning to the end. So I'm always moving as if I know I could pass away at any time. I almost died last year. I had a heart attack and I had to get a stent put in my heart, all that. So I could have died. And so you don't take anything for granted. And when it comes to family members and things like that, I always try to tell them, if you've never been there before, this is the time to be there, because this is when they need you the most. You just can't see it the way you can see mine, but it's that they need you the most.
Okay. Well, thank you for all of that. And I appreciate it. Does anybody have any more? Oh, you have a question? Here you go.
I had a question for the doctor. Are you the doctor? Okay. And you made a statement about when they have this disease, the insides or whatever, and it's more difficult to have surgery on them. Is this because the disease, like she says, on the inside is making things harder to?
Well, if I look at the joints or skin, hello? So when you operate on someone, you got to cut the skin, right?
Okay.
The skin is so hard, you can't put it back together. And then you have the chronic swelling and joint pain. So if you operate on a joint, it's difficult because it's rare, autoimmune, but it's also part of the arthritis family. So those patients that makes the surgical outcome very complicated. So it becomes difficult. So a lot of us surgeons are like, oh, we don't want to touch it. So that's why we kind of let the rheumatologist manage it medically with medication and depending on this, therapy. And as we have seen, it can go from one extreme to the other. She's had major situation. She's had a different situation as well. Charlene, kind of new to the scene, has a difference. So there's overlap, but there's no one patient that looks exactly alike. One end up with surgery, one end up with a transplant, other one with, so you will see a variety of these things. But at the end of the day, it's very debilitating. They have similar stuff to facial issues and all of that. But in no one presentation.
So pregnancy is not an option for them, especially if you're not. Oh, here, go ahead.
So when I was diagnosed, as I said, Demi introduced me to a lot of the scleroderma patients, and that was one of the things that I found out, that most of them who were diagnosed during childbearing age never had children. There's only a few of us that have children, because I was 55 years old when mine came out. They were 19. Carla was young as well, so most of them never had children. A lot of the medication that they give you, they don't want you to have children because of the medications. And so that's a big reason why. I think I've only met one other, maybe two other women over the Zoom calls during COVID who had children who were diagnosed later on that had actually had children, but a lot of them don't.
Well, thank you for sharing all your stories with us. We really, really appreciate it. Hopefully everybody is more aware of the effects of this disease. And I'm going to turn it back over to Earl at this point to move us on down our agenda.
Thank you. Ladies, raise your hand again. All right. Well, as you, your journey takes you through the scleroderma, there's ways to combat it or ways to help you cope. And we're going to have coming to speak with us now, what's her, Mrs. Well, she's from the Cleveland Clinic Wellness Department, nutritionist, and she'll give you her name when she gets here. But I'm sure what you put in your body makes a big difference,
Hi, everyone. My name's Alexis Supan. I am the dietitian with the Cleveland Clinic Wellness Department. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to go through the presentation and then I will leave a little time at the end. So if you've got any questions for me, just hold on to them, try and remember them or jot them down, and I'll get to them, I promise. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about an anti-inflammatory diet and why that can help with scleroderma. So I'll get into the benefits of the diet, and we'll talk about what foods you want to avoid, what foods you want to eat, and then we'll talk about some tips that could actually help you kind of implement these things. Because as you'll see, it's kind of easy to talk about what foods are good to eat and what foods you want to avoid. As we all know, it's a lot harder to put things into practice when it comes to making those decisions day in and day out. All right, so the reason we're going to talk about an anti-inflammatory diet is because with autoimmune disorders like scleroderma, our body can start to experience chronic inflammation. So it's kind of important to know, why we're eating like this. Now, chronic inflammation is something that can go on in our bodies, and it's really common for any autoimmune disorders. So with scleroderma, with Crohn's disease, with colitis, there's a bunch of autoimmune disorders that when people have them, their body can stay in this state of inflammation. Now, inflammation for ourselves is typically good. When we hurt ourselves, when we roll an ankle, when you scratch yourself and your body swells up a little bit and you see that inflammation, that's a good thing that your body's doing to help heal something. But when inflammation becomes chronic, that's when it can really start to damage our bodies, and we could actually hurt our own DNA when we're experiencing lots of chronic inflammation. So The good news is we can actually help address chronic inflammation in the bodies and reduce it through our diet. Our diets do have the capabilities of actually lowering our inflammation levels. And with that lower inflammation, people actually start to experience and notice some improvement to their conditions. A lot of times it will lead to a lot less pain. That's the number one thing I hear from people who start a really strong anti-inflammatory diet. They'll start noticing they have less swelling in their joints. They feel a lot less chronic pain. They feel they could move better. So they really start to feel encouraged by following this type of diet. The other good news about a anti-inflammatory diet, and I feel like this is really important to know for anyone with families, anyone who has to factor in multiple people when it comes to cooking and food prep, this diet is just a generally healthy diet. We aren't talking about anything too crazy. We aren't talking about a way to eat that, isn't appropriate for other people. Following an anti-inflammatory diet is also going to reduce your risk for cancer, heart disease, stroke, diabetes. Almost all of the big health issues that we hear about often are going to be improved by following this type of diet. All right, so as I mentioned before, our diet can affect our chronic inflammation, and we could actually help control it and bring down that level. Now, there's really 3 groups of foods to know about. There's foods that cause inflammation. There's foods that really don't impact it at all, which for all of us, that means they're essentially a safe food to have. They're a good thing for you to have because they're not making anything worse. And then there's foods that could actually bring down that inflammation level. So let's start with talking about the good stuff, the anti-inflammatory foods. Has anyone in here heard of the Mediterranean diet? Yeah, a bunch of people, right? Very popular. A Mediterranean diet is an anti-inflammatory diet. And the things up here are the things that an anti-inflammatory diet or the Mediterranean diet promotes. So those are things like your fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, and healthy fatty fish, which are things like salmon or mackerel or anchovies or sardines. And then I've also got herbs and spices because those are really good for us for helping fight inflammation. Now, that being said, there are a few foods out there that kind of give us a little extra bang for their buck when it comes to helping fight inflammation. All the foods I've got listed up here, I'll let everyone take a look, are really, really packed with antioxidants. Now, antioxidants are things that essentially help protect our bodies from free radicals, which all you need to know is free radicals are in our bodies and they could damage our cells from bouncing around. When we have a lot of antioxidants going into our bodies, that actually provides us a layer of protection. It sort of neutralizes all of those bad things going on in our body. So the more of these guys that you could add, the more you'll protect yourself and really help bring down that inflammation level. All right, so we will go back to all the good foods that we want to focus on, but I definitely have to bring up, unfortunately, the inflammatory foods. Because as important as it is to add in some of those good anti-inflammatory foods, if we've got a diet high in a lot of these inflammatory foods, your chronic inflammation level, unfortunately, is going to stay high. All the berries in the world can't totally prevent us from too many bad foods in the diet. So as far as foods that cause inflammation, it's a lot of our really processed foods. So nothing too surprising here. Foods that are really high in sugar can cause inflammation. Refined and processed carbohydrates also can. Those are essentially our white starches. White bread, regular pasta, white rice, things that have been overly processed from their original version of brown rice, whole wheat products, whole grains like quinoa. So those refined carbohydrates we want to try and stay away from. A lot of fried foods can cause some inflammation. And one of the big ones I really want to point out here is processed meats and high-fat meats. Those are probably one of the biggest causes of inflammation in the diet. And I will get into the specifics of sort of what qualifies as a processed meat or a really high-fat meat. All right, so to break down kind of what all these things are. Refined carbohydrates, as I mentioned, it's a lot of your white products. You want to think a little bit outside of the box, though. So it's easy to say, okay, I know white bread isn't good, I'll do whole wheat, or I know white rice isn't good, I'll do brown rice. But you also want to start to think about, well, where's white flour coming into my diet? And I've got a few things listed up here. So things that are breaded are typically breaded with normal breadcrumbs. Those are made, unfortunately, almost always with white flour. Things like pretzels are made with white flours. So all of those little things up there, pastries, crackers, those types of things, you want to start to think, is this made with a white flour or a refined carbohydrate? If it is, that's something that's inflammatory. So you want to try to avoid that and choose your whole grain options instead. Another big cause of the inflammation, as I mentioned, was added sugar. And this is one that sneaks in everywhere in our diets, absolutely everywhere. If you ever want to see something upsetting, you could keep track of how much added sugar you have coming in a week's time in your diet just by looking at labels. And you'll see just everything we eat has tons of added sugar in it. For two reasons, unfortunately. One, added sugar is really, really cheap. It's really, really cheap to make high fructose corn syrup and add it to products. And then number two, Americans unfortunately really like sugar. If anyone has friends from South America or Europe or Africa or Asia who have moved here, you've probably heard this. I hear it all the time from people. I can't believe why everything here is so sweet. Even chips, lots of things we eat. Americans, unfortunately, we love to add sugar to things and we have a lot of sweet stuff. So this sneaks in a lot of places. As you can see, I've got a bunch of things there that aren't inherently sweet seeming things, but that's where we get a lot of added sugars. So it's good to start looking at your diet. You know, what of these things do you have in there that you can start to cut back on, that you can replace with some lower sugar options? Now on the bottom here, I've got that you should check your labels. That's really important because they actually changed the regulation of labels, I think about 2 years ago now, where they made it necessary to start listing added sugars. And that's that scary number that we kind of want to look out for and try and limit, because that's what can sneak up really high. Now, to be safe, to help keep your inflammation levels lower, you want to try and stay under 24 grams of added sugar a day. If you're a woman, if you're a man, you get up to 30. It's not fair, but it is what it is, so. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. All right, so this is just an example of a product that's pretty high in added sugars. I've got the ingredient list over here. Anyone have a guess what this is? You're getting really close. Barbecue sauce. So, you could get in 16 grams of added sugar, and that's just from 2 tablespoons, which we all know we don't always just use 2 tablespoons, of course. Yeah. So when I talk about added sugars, so when I see people like in my office for this all the time, I'll mention like, oh, sugar, worst thing for inflammation. Number one thing I usually hear in response, well, sometimes people are like, oh, well, I love sugar, that's bad for me. But I hear a lot of people say things like, oh, I don't even have a sweet tooth, we're fine there. But they will sit down and we'll do the math for how much sugar's in their diet. And as I said, women should be at around 24, men at 30. Not uncommon to have someone who doesn't eat sweets during the day, and they could easily eat 60 grams of added sugar, no problem. You add in this, you add in just like a few other condiments or little things that we don't even associate with being sweet, and that sneaks in. So start to check your labels. When you go home, this doesn't have to be a huge thing you do, you know, it doesn't have to be a weeks-long process, but when you go home, next time you grab one of your condiment containers, just take a peek. Take a peek and see, you know, is this good for me, is this not so good for me? All right, so the few other foods that are inflammatory, there's just a couple of things I want to point out. So it's a lot of our processed foods. Now, at the top there, Doritos, Cheetos, etc. Not surprising. I'm sure no one in here was running around eating Doritos thinking this is the best thing for me. So, you know, that one's a little bit obvious. But under that, I want to point out something. So I've got broccoli tots on there. I've got veggie straws on there. Keep in mind that the anti-inflammatory diet is a very natural diet. We're talking about whole foods. I usually like to explain it as foods that have been around for 200 years. If something existed 200 years ago, there's a much better chance it's safer for you. So even when you're looking at products, if you're looking at something that's designed to look healthy, like a broccoli tot or veggie straw, remember processed is processed. And instead of doing those types of things, it's better to eat the vegetables and to eat broccoli, because those are still processed foods that can cause inflammation. And then right under that, I've got the list of the processed meats and the higher fat meats. These and sugar are really our two biggest causes of inflammation in the body. So these are ones that it's really important to limit. Unfortunately, I'm sure you guys look at this the same way I do, which is just like, oh man, that's a lot of the kind of most common foods in the diet. These are the foods, especially with it being summer out, sausages, burgers, those types of things we see all the time. So try and be careful with these processed meats and trying to cut back on them. Sticking with more natural meats is the way to go. Going to the butcher, the way I describe it, sorry if this grosses anyone out, is always if you could picture a piece of meat that was cut right off the animal, if you're like, oh yeah, that's, a steak cut right from an animal, that's good. If we've got something like a hot dog or sausage or pepperoni that has clearly been kind of processed a lot and had a lot done to it, those are the ones that you want to try and limit. All right, now a big question I get when it comes to inflammation is, what about gluten, what about dairy? The answer is this is very individual. There's probably some people in this room who should be gluten and dairy free, and there's probably some people in this room who could eat gluten and dairy without having any negative effect on their inflammation levels. The quick and most important answer I just want everyone to have is that because it's so individual, this is a great thing to actually test out on your own and see if you notice improvements. There is some testing to figure out if you are gluten or lactose intolerant, dairy intolerant. I'll be honest with everyone in here, you're better off doing your own kind of personal test for a month or two, getting rid of those foods, seeing if you have less pain, less GI discomfort, any improvement to symptoms overall. Because if you do that, you've got your answer. The testing, the answer is not always perfect there. Some people will tell me they tested that they can tolerate gluten fine, and then they cut it out of their diet, and then they felt a lot better. So it's just something you want to do on your own. All right. Now, getting into some of those healthy foods again and some good decisions, I always encourage people, start with just a few healthy swaps. Really simple. I don't want anyone in here to start thinking like, oh my gosh, I really love this food. I can't believe I have to get rid of it. Take a look through this chart and start to pick out just one or two things where you could say, oh, you know what? I don't even care about making that swap. That's an easy one for me. Let's say you look down here and you look at fresh herbs and you say, you know what? I really do love foods with fresh herbs. I love fresh cilantro on something. Let this just be a reminder that you want to make those changes, even though it might be a little bit more effort to get a fresh herb than have a condiment container at home. Now you know it might be something you like, and it's also something that's really going to help improve your health overall. So picking out just a few swaps here or there can be really good decisions. All right. A few other important tips. The best tip, of course, I could give to anyone is try and cook at home more. When we are out, so of course if you're eating fast food, it's not going to be the healthiest, but even if you're eating at restaurants, we really don't know what food we're getting. Unfortunately, all restaurants are in the business of kind of paying the bills and staying in business, which means that they might choose cheaper foods than we would ideally like to give ourselves. If you cook at home, you have a lot more control over what ingredients are going into your body. And then I always like to point out, and our chefs are always great with talking about this, is that meal prep and cooking at home truly are acts of self-care. It's an act that a lot of us kind of let slip. We say, oh my gosh, I'm really too busy to do this. I'll order out, I'll DoorDash, I'll Uber Eats, or grab something on the way home. You really want to invest some time in meal prepping and cooking. It's beneficial for us, not just in the ways that it can improve your health, but also it can be great family time. I have a lot of people, say, oh, there's no time in the day, I've got kids. Sit down in the kitchen with your kids, see if you guys could cook an extra meal at home if that's not something you do now. Start to put a little more time into it. It's really pleasant to be in the kitchen. Most people find being surrounded by fresh fruits and vegetables and herbs and spices, it smells good. It can be therapeutic to people with time. It's just about getting in that habit. Oh, I should also mention, those are a few of my favorite cookbooks. So if anyone in here is like, oh, I need a little more specific guidelines, I do have a couple recipes printed out over in this little lobby area, but these are also a ton of cookbooks I highly recommend. Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat is on Netflix. If anyone has Netflix, have you watched it? I see some smiles in here. It's a show on Netflix, so I highly recommend watching it. But anyways, great places to get started with following more of an anti-inflammatory diet. All right, some other healthy lifestyle changes. Number one, keep unhealthy foods out of the house. So that list of processed foods I had up there and that list of foods with added sugar, those are foods a lot of us like. There's no shame in that. There's nothing wrong with saying like, oh yeah, I love those foods. I have a hard time staying away. Do yourself the benefit though of just keeping them out of your house to make it easier to avoid. Foods that come in the house get eaten. Foods that don't come in the house we're much less likely to eat because a lot of times, to be honest, we're too lazy to run out late at night if you want chips. But if you're there, you'll eat them. If they're there, you'll eat them. So try and keep a really healthy home, a really healthy environment. Stay well hydrated. This actually can help with inflammation too. Not only do I want everyone here to work on trying to get in a little extra water because that's good for our inflammation levels, one other tip is try to avoid drinking water from plastic bottles. We can get microplastics. There is some evidence in there that drinking from plastics can be a bit of a risk factor for us. So get a glass water bottle, get one of the stainless steel water bottles. Try and hydrate using one of those more than anything plastic. And that goes for the more like permanent plastic water bottles and just the kind of like one-time use ones. All right, I talked about planning healthy meals and cooking more at home. As far as making meal prep enjoyable, so I talked about it's good to kind of do that with kids and family members and kind of make it a ritual. If you are someone who's just cooking for yourself most of the time or just wants some alone time and some peace and quiet, make sure you throw in some music, throw in an audiobook, do some cooking at home in the kitchen, take some time to yourself to meal prep, and that will help you stick with eating a lot more of these anti-inflammatory foods. Because of course, with doing more whole foods, with doing more natural and less processed things, it does require a little bit more time, a little bit more intent. So make sure you make that meal prep time enjoyable so you're more likely to stick to it. And then one last thing I have on there, never think of a day as ruined. This is such a common thing that humans do, but we really think our diets are kind of like pass fail every day. And once we've done something that we perceive as too bad, we think, oh, it's ruined. I'm just going to get a blizzard on the way home too because I ate a really, really bad lunch. You know, it's so normal. And then it's like, well, I'll just keep eating and tomorrow I'll start fresh, or Monday I'll start fresh, or the first of the month I'll start fresh, you know, the things we tell ourselves. The anti-inflammatory diet, the Mediterranean diet, perfect examples of why you don't really want to think like that, why that's not true. Everything coming in our mouth, again, can either be neutral or it can cause inflammation or fight inflammation. So you always want to make sure that you're not overdoing it with lots of inflammatory foods. Always remember, everything going in your mouth can help you. Okay, and then up here, again, I just have a few other specific ideas that if it helps you, pick out one or two that you want to work on for the next month. I'm not expecting everyone to walk out of here and say like, okay, we have no processed foods ever again at home. Just start making some subtle, some easy changes for you guys. So pick out one or two of these, see if you could commit to those and just take those steps in the right direction to doing a more anti-inflammatory diet. All right, and I'll leave that up there. Okay, so that is the basics of an anti-inflammatory diet and kind of why it can help. What questions do you guys have for me? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No chicken wings?
So chicken wings. So there's chicken wings are a weird one, I'll be honest. So the good things, a good thing about chicken wings, it's especially like if we're talking you went and you got a bag of fresh wings, not like frozen ones or ones that have been breaded and fried. If you just go to the butcher and get some chicken wings as is, I would put them at sort of like a slightly a little bad food to neutral. They're higher in saturated fat, and saturated fat can be kind of bad for us compared to pretty much every other part of the chicken. So if you do, especially if you do anything skinless, so thighs, breasts, something like that that's skinless, that won't be inflammatory at all. Chicken skin is essentially the kind of like bad part of chicken. I know. Okay, what about salmon? Salmon is phenomenal. Like truly one of great for inflammation, amazing for heart health, amazing for brain health. Really one of the best foods you can have in your diet. Trying to eat it at least twice a week is ideal. Yeah. No potato chips? No. This is good. This is perfect. Yeah. So. Exactly. So plain Lay's, no, not going to be that It's going to cause some inflammation. If you keep it to a serving of plain Lay's, something like you can't. No, you can't. You could that's why I tell people keep it out of the house. And when you are like, I need chips, I've been thinking about it for 2 days. Walk over to the gas station, get the smaller bag, eat the smaller bag. Don't bring it home. You know, there's no, and it's terrible because the cost is practically the same. Yeah. I used to tell people, you know, get the big thing of the little bags that you give to kids for like school, but everyone just opens like 6 bags. And then you just feel worse because you're like, oh man, there's a lot of bags in the trash. Say that again? Yeah. So the truth of it as to why so there's kind of 2 components here. One is that foods high in unhealthier fats, like saturated fats, cause inflammation. They don't play that well with our body. But the other, and I would say probably even bigger thing here, is something like a Lay's potato chip specifically, or any like big brand name. Those are all going to be made. As I said, like restaurants exist to stay in business and make money. Well, same with all the food companies. Food companies could care less if we all get super sick and die. They really can. It's awful. But because of that, they're going to use the cheapest oils out there. And when we have really cheap oils, really highly processed oils in our diet, that's what's really bad for inflammation. So if you were to make some potato chips at home, if you were to get like a higher quality oil, use that once, fry up some chips, and then pitch it. Olive oil is the healthiest for frying in that context. I don't think olive oil would work. But even doing some canola oil and then getting rid of the oil you used, that truly would be much better and much more beneficial to your body, because when food companies are frying a lot, they're constantly heating and using that oil. The more an oil is heated and cooled down and heated and cooled down, the more inflammatory it is for us. Yeah. Yeah, so I've got the recipes, and I've got another card that has the like full list for the Mediterranean diet, like what are the foods you want to eat. Yeah. Go ahead. Great question. Regular meat's better. So yeah, you know what? The Impossible Burger and the Beyond Burger were like the 2 kind of big things that came up a couple years ago. Essentially, the main thing to know is that those were a couple foods made for people who do not want to eat animals. So more of like from a like pet loving, I love animals standpoint, the companies made foods where it's like, oh, you like a good juicy burger, but you don't want to hurt cows. There's your burger. They're not meant in any way to be a healthier substitute. They put in a lot of unhealthy stuff in there because, as you can imagine, to replicate a good juicy burger, you're going to need a lot of kind of unhealthy stuff in there. So much better to do even like a leaner beef burger. Much better option than some of those guys. Yeah. Yeah, it's and that one of the like most common things. Great question. Sure. Yes. So all of those, anything, essentially if it specifies no sugar, most of the time it's going to have one of the artificial sweeteners in it. And those so I'll say this, those have very, kind of like gluten and dairy, can have very different responses to different people. So it's one of those things where it's usually best to cut it out. No diet. I usually tell people a really good, like a good safe line to go with is 1 diet drink a day. So drink mostly water, mostly unsweetened tea. But if you're like, oh, but I just love like a Diet Coke or a Diet Sprite, have one a day. That little bit probably is not going to have a noticeable impact. If you're drinking it all day long, if it's, if everything you drink is Crystal Light, it's probably going to cause inflammation. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. So there is some evidence out there that when we drink bottled water, or if you just had like a plastic water bottle at home, that we're getting in microplastics when we drink those things. Tiny little pieces of plastic. Not that any of us would ever see like truly microscopic. If you're drinking 6-7 bottles a day, it adds up. And this is one of those things where, unfortunately, like, I'm sure a lot of you can kind of like remember times where having water bottles everywhere wasn't as common. So this is new, it's not like we have 100 years of saying like, oh, when people drank a lot of those water from those bottles, it was bad. It's newer, but a lot of the doctors kind of more on the forefront of this are saying, the risk factors are kind of starting to show up. Yeah.
Is this true? I heard it was extra bad if you drink bottled waters that have been sitting in your car for a while and it's baked in the sun.
I've heard that
and all
too. Yeah, when it's been summer and it's gotten hot. Mm-hmm.
So is that true? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So good to avoid. Go ahead. Just as bad. Mm-hmm.
What kind of water should we drink? Alkaline water.
If you want, so truly, I mean, if you're in a place where you feel comfortable with the tap water. Just drink tap water, have glass cups at home. You don't want to be drinking out of the plastic. You can get a Brita filter if you want, but yeah, anything else, I'm kind of getting into risky territory.
What about our plastic cups at home in the cupboard?
That's where like, I've pressed doctors on this before to find out kind of where the line is. A lot of it is going to boil down to the quality of the plastic and what went into it initially. My takeaway is always, if you want to be really safe, just try to avoid it as much as reasonable. Yeah.
Way back there.
So can we still like purchase bottled water but drink it out of a glass, or just avoid bottled water?
You'll still get the plastic.
Okay.
Yeah. So really best do tap water. Which for the most part, tap water is good and safe. If you're worried about your tap water, get a Brita or any filter. Yeah. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen that, and I've seen canned as well.
Yeah, water, just saying, only it'll say you want to say this is better than bottled water.
Yeah.
It's in a paper cart like milk can.
Yeah, so that's a good option. Yeah, I've seen that, and I've seen the canned ones. Yeah.
At work, next to the water bottle, the water top cooler.
Yeah.
So that big plastic thing with the water in it is not good for you.
I mean, truly, it's so funny. We've done all these things and spent so much money to get away from just tap water.
Wow.
Yeah. Right, yeah, you can't. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much for having me. Thank you. And then just in case anyone is curious, so as I said, I have some information out there. There's also information about seeing me. So if anyone in here is like, oh my gosh, like I need to go into way more specifics or I have more stuff going on to factor in, grab one of those handouts and you could always come see me. All right, thank you, everyone.
The United for Scleroderma Foundation appreciates you and thanks the following individuals and organization: Dr. Saper for recommending and assisting with the Cleveland Clinic Wellness staff coming out to participate in today's Awareness Month event. The staff of Carnival Child Development Center, Emory Jameson, who helped with the signage and brochures. The board members and friends, Ralston Dowles with the City of Cleveland Channel 20, along with our MC and host, Arrow Porter. We thank them so much. Please spread awareness and share your experience. Thank you for your great hospitality, and I will see you next year. And if you're interested in volunteering or giving, please reach out to us at unitedforscleroderma.org. Additionally, a brochure is available upon your request. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.